Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Welcome back to Peaceful Patchwork. This time for August, we know that is one of the hottest months of the year. Our gardens are just exploding with everything, and the bees are there. The sunflowers have come up and they're beautiful. So this is a celebration of that time of the year where the garden is just it's overflowing. At least my garden is. And we have the beautiful bees here, and we have our sunflowers set off, of course, with our sunflowers outer border. I think this one might be my favorite in the series so far. So just like we've been doing, it's the same size here. So once you find that special spot on your wall, maybe at home, maybe even at work, you get to just change that out. We have the aqua hanger here. So if you haven't already picked that up, be sure to pick that up. Kits are the way to go. We're hearing so many positive comments from customers. They love the convenience of our kits. Not just the convenience, but the fact that these fabrics that we're showing you are the exact fabrics in your kit. Remember that I was a customer before I became a business owner. I know what that's like to fall in love with what's on the wall at the quilt shop, buy the kit, and get home and discover that what's in my kit wasn't exactly what I saw on the wall. And I was disappointed because there were maybe was a key fabric that I really fell in love with that really drove me to buy that kit. So when I said, you know what, we're going to start Shabby Fabrics, I told our team, let's make sure that what we show people is what they get. And so you have our assurance of that, as well as a proved, tested pattern. So we're going to be covering a lot of territory today. This is all piecing, so we already know we're going to need some tools. You'll see me using those, so I'll just talk about them as I use them. All of them are very important here, and they help us be more successful with our precise patchwork, with my 1/4-inch seam guide really being the most important thing to help me stay true to that, because I tend to sew a little bit chunkier than that 1/4 inch. So 2 B blocks with just a touch of hand embroidery, but I'm going to give you an option if you don't like to do hand embroidery, although I encourage you to give it a try. Maybe you've never done that, or maybe it's been a while. Or if you're like, nope, that's not my thing, I'm going to give you an option for that. But we'll first talk about making the bee, then we'll move on to the sunflower, and then we'll come back in the end and we'll talk about that hand embroidery, or give you that option if you'd like to skip the hand embroidery. So let's just jump into it. All of our fabrics, of course, have been pre-sized, ironed, and precisely cut to the measurements that are inside our pattern. Lots of stitch and flip. We've talked about this before. We've been doing that kind of all throughout the series. Many times, this is just an example here at the top of your pattern. We have a rectangle, a smaller square, draw the line, sew, and then trim and flip to the outside. That's it. Lots of that happening today. You don't need to see me doing that on a sewing machine. I want to talk to you more about some pressing techniques, why we press things the way we do. So we're going to start right down here in our B block right here, and this is our B block. I just have to shout out about this amazing fabric that we were able to add to our wings, just because their wings are so important, right? We couldn't resist using a fairy frost that has some beautiful gold glitter. So depending on when you walk in the room and you see your project, it's going to be catching the light, which I think is a lot of fun. It adds magic. So let's just look at our fabrics. We love to go ahead and just put a small sticker on our fabrics so that we stay organized. We always go to our cutting sheet. We pre-cut everything. Some people kind of cut as they go. We like to pre-cut everything before we get going. And you can see, especially from this aqua, that's a lot of cuts. Grab some just sticky notes, or we just have the kind of mailing labels, and we write that and just kind of trim them up, label our fabric. However you want to do that, we highly encourage you to label your fabric. So this is our fabric D. And just like we've been doing, and what we're showing here on the back of each of the A's, B's, and C, we have simply drawn that line corner to corner. Of course, we're removing our stickers, placing that precisely in our location. So we're right in those corners. and sewing directly on the line. We've done that ahead of time. And in this instance, we're going to be pressing to the green. We're going to be pressing away. So just like it's showing here, we're pressing in that direction. So let me just remove that there. And at first glance, when I first saw this, at first I thought, are those identical? Because notice the C is in the same position. Notice the B is in the same position, but the letter A is in opposite. So I first thought, oh, you're making two of those. No, they're slightly different. So this is going to be for one of the B's. This is going to be this one here. And for this one here, of course, the A, instead of being up here, will just be down there. That's it. Remember, the arrows are letting you know which direction to press. So I love that. That's a new change at Shabby. We've been doing that now about 5 or 6 months. We used to write out, press to the green or press to the center. It's so much easier to just look at an arrow and go, oh, I'm pressing in that direction. So I can easily see, okay, they want me to press to the outside each time. I like to press and then trim. Some people do trim and then press. Why do I like to press and then trim afterward? There have been a few times where I put my fabric in the corner, walked to my machine, didn't pin it, sewed, and it got slightly cattywampus so that I wasn't exactly square. I went back, trimmed it off, and when I pressed to the outside, only then did I notice I was cattywampus. My corner was no longer 90 degrees. I'd already trimmed the fabric. The water's now under the bridge. So that is why I like to, even with having been a quilter now for many decades, I still don't get over my skis where I'm thinking, of course my quilting's perfect. It is seldom perfect. I try for perfection, and sometimes I get close, but other times just be on certain you're where you should be. Once you've got that, of course, now we're rolling this back. In fact, let me just trim one in case you're a brand new viewer. I'm going to grab any one of my Creative Grid tools. Do you see this dash line here? That's 1/4 of an inch. So when I trim, I simply lay that dash line right on my stitching. And when I trim away, I now know that's a perfect 1/4 inch. I just like the precision of that. If I trim that slightly less or more than 1/4, is that important? No, because it's not like it's back here, right? But I just like the precision of it. So that's just me. And I just trim all the way around. Okay? So you can see that this happens to be half of our wings. You can see now why this is hopping to the opposite side, right? You can see that. So you're going to make 2 bee wings, of course, for each of the bees. Now let's talk about this portion here, which is the head. And of course, we are starting off with our letter E. This is just a square. I'll bring this over there so it's a little easier, right next to the project here. A little easier for you to follow along. Guess what? Sew and flip, sew and flip. This is all we've been doing, right? So we're going to be placing this, obviously draw on the line, here, here, and here. Sew on the line, but this time, notice how the arrows are saying, go inward, go inward. Every time we don't just randomly go, we feel like pressing in or out this time. No, there's always a reason. And usually, if we're not pressing outward, which is our natural default, there's a reason for doing that. And it's usually because of interlocking seams. And absolutely that is true in this case. So I just want to make sure that even as an experienced quilter, I'm now learning, and I'm always reminded of the value of proper pressing to help interlocking seams, to help blocks come out more precisely, and the iron flatter. So this is what this is going to look like once it's sewn. And again, trim and press to the blacks. You're like, well, how does that work? How do I press to the black? What I do initially is press this way initially. Make sure I am happy with what's happened. Nothing got cattywampus. If I'm happy with what I've stitched, we still need to trim away. So I'm just going to demonstrate this maybe once or twice so that if that's unusual to you to press back toward the middle, like how do we do this? Let me grab here, I'm going to grab anything. I'll just grab this little ruler here, which also has a 1/4 inch seam mark. So I start with that standard step that I told you I do each time consistently. But because I want this now pressed to the black, I simply flip this over, come back, and I press the portion that I just trimmed to the black. That part is still going to go out. It's just this portion. So if you are fairly new to quilting, and maybe this is something you've not done, this is how I like to do the pressing. And now everything is pressed toward the middle, and I come back from the front, press it one more time, and now we have this element here. So let's just turn that. So it's just like the orientation here of our pattern. So this is kind of where we are right now. Now we have our letter F and our letter G, and you can see here, simply turning this right side together. Now, you have a choice. Should you sew this from this side or should you sew from this side? And if you've been watching for a minute, if you've been a regular viewer, you know, as tempting as it might be to sew on this side, because it's pretty, right? You don't see unsightly seams. I can't keep track of those seams that sometimes want to roll back as the presser foot comes and it just kind of catches that fabric and it rolls that. And then I later on have to seam rip. Start in this corner and pin. Down in this corner and pin. We know those have to fit. And you could put another one, pin again if you want to, or go with 2. But the point here is that I'm not really worried about that seam, because as we come down, our presser foot is going to trap that. But what about this one? Boom, rolled seam. I look back at my earliest quilts, I almost can't look at them because I just kind of lived with it. I didn't know that was a thing until I got the feedback from the long arm quilter that was like, wow, that quilt was kind of hard to do. You had a lot of rolled seams, things weren't laying flat. My quilts were, well, I was a beginner. I didn't realize how important this is to not have rolled seams, to have interlocking seams, and all of the things that truly do make a difference. So, of course, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch, and notice we're pressing away. That makes sense. Moving away from a lot of pressure here and those 2 corners, and then we're adding our piece above, and that's what that looks like. So this is the upper portion here of our B. But to get the bee body kind of going, we're cutting various strips and simply sewing them together. That's it. No big surprise on that one. Now this is oversized. So first off, make sure that when you start trimming this, because we're first going to piece this together, but now we have to trim this. There's a note here to trim with a tool called the Perfect 5. This is in my top 5. I use this all the time for when I make point of views where I have 5-inch units and we're making these beautiful prairie points all the way around. I use this all the time. Charm packs. Maybe you have a pattern that calls for charm packs, but you don't have one, but you have scraps. Get this tool, lay this on your fabric, cut all the way around it with your spinning mat. You just made your own charm pack. In this instance, and I'm going to show you how to do this with and without this tool. If you have the Perfect 5, just like it's showing, not the big thick yellow fabric, but the second one, there's a line here that you can see that we're simply going to place directly. You can see that line. I'm scooting that down to make sure the tip of my ruler is inside the edges. And all I do at this point is trim all the way around it. It's so easy. It's perfect. If you don't have that, what you would do, let's say you have the Critter Grid 6.5 by 12.5, which I think many of us have. In this instance, what I would recommend is see the 5 here and the 5 there. If you put that exact point and this exact point on that black line that matches our pattern right here, and notice this line's kind of running parallel, this is about as good of guidance as you're going to get. It's not comfortable, but it could work. You would trim, again, rotate the mat if you have one, trim, but you're only able to do 2 sides. Then you need to flip this block and repeat those steps. That's just uncomfortable. So if I were watching this video and knowing I cannot recommend the Perfect 5 enough, I love this tool. You are going to find so many ways and reasons to use this. If I was putting this kit in my cart, I would absolutely put this in my cart, well, because it's well beyond this project that you will use this. And if you haven't checked out our point of view, you're going to love it. And this is the tool I use every time. Okay, I am going to cut this with this because we do have this on set. And my favorite part about doing this in conjunction with a spinning mat is that I don't have to pick up my fabric ever. It's here the whole time. Okay, now let's see how we did. Let's see if we got that right. And this is what it's showing, and this is what it's looking like. There are times where the tools can do so many things for you, and this is absolutely one of them, as well as the spinning mat. Once you have this portion done, we've been doing our sew and flip, of course. We have our letter A. That's coming right here in this corner, right here in this corner, sew and flip, until you have your bee body here. So let me just show you what that's going to look like. And we're going to be pressing toward the green for that. And again, our arrows are indicating that. Press, and then we're going to trim. Let's trim that. Okay, now I think that we have all the elements to lay out a block. We have the head of the bee, and we have, let's see here, this is going to be, I believe that's our lower wing, and this is going to be our upper wing, and this, of course, is our body. So these elements are coming together here, and you can see here how we sewed this together. We have our 2 units placed right side together. Let's talk about that pressing. Remember how I talked about the interlocking seams? Right here. So we have the seam going this way. Remember how we pressed toward the black? When I place these right side together, that place right there is where I'm absolutely going to pin first, that spot. Then in the corner and the opposite corner. Wherever you want those points to hit, whatever's most important for you, pin there first and pin everywhere else afterward. And whether you sew on either side probably doesn't matter. 1/4 inch seam allowance, and notice how we pressed our seam open here just to distribute that. And once again here on this side, as we place that, Notice how we have offset seams. So we don't have interlocking seams, but still we have a nice, it lays good and flat, so a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once again, we pressed that open, and then of course your 2 rows, right side together, you're going to pin here first, right? Let's pretend these borders were on, and I have these 2 together. I am pinning here first, left and right, and everything in between. We press that open, and then we simply add our borders, right? We've been doing that. Most of the blocks we've been doing, we have kind of borders to kind of finish those out. But that is how we make our bee block. And I'll come back a little bit later and we'll talk about that stitching here, the antenna for our bee. Or if you're like, nope, I don't do that hand stitching, we'll talk about what that option might be for you. I'll go ahead and clean up the table. We'll come back and we'll talk about our sunflower and give you some tips and techniques with that. And then after that's done, we'll come back and we'll cover the option for the antenna, either stitching or drawing those on. I'll get this cleaned up and I'll be right back. For our sunflower block here, let's just actually take a look at that as well as what's on the quilt. In the block I have this gingham that, this is my orientation. It's on the right side, it's on the right side, right side, right side. But on the other block, notice how the gingham is on the left side, left side, left side, left side. That just happens in the journey of what we're going to do. We did something similar to that on a previous Pieceful Patchwork, where when you make a specific unit, you end up with 2 that are similar but different. So this is like that. So let's just start unpacking this, just like we've been doing so much of our already series that's already been filmed, drawing the lines, sewing on the lines, or sewing a 1/4 inch away from the line. Our pattern says for fabric A on the back side to draw a line. Now in your kit, if you're going to be picking up our kit, this is a beautiful solid. I love this color. It's just such a beautiful color. It's a solid. There really isn't a right and wrong side, but we know some people might want to pick up the pattern and use their own fabric. So if you're like, why do they keep saying the back side if it's a solid? Just again, because there could be customers that just want to pick up the pattern and use their own fabric to make the project. So, and maybe they're not using a solid. So in your case, if you have the kit, you're just going to be drawing the line on one of those sides. And with our beautiful gold floret, this is a Riley Blake fabric, we will be right side together. And our pattern is having us sew a 1/4 inch either side. And we've talked about the option of, you know, if you don't want to have to go to your sewing machine and track a 1/4 inch to the left and then track a 1/4 inch to the right, maybe you want to instead use one of my other favorite notions from Creative Grid, and this is their seam guide. I am very consistent about sewing on a drawn line, much more consistent than I am tracking a 1/4 inch away from a line. So if that's you and you're like, oh, sign me up for that one, this is how you do it. You simply lay that on either side, draw with your friction pen, and now, again, placing these right side together, you're pinning, you're sewing on those drawn lines. However you get there, whether you're going to draw the line corner to corner and track, or you're going to use the seam guide, doesn't matter. We've already done that, and I see that our team chose the seam guide. I never know. Sometimes they draw the line, and sometimes they use the seam guide. Looks like they did that. And this time, what we'll do is we're going to cut corner to corner, and our instruction is guiding us to right here, press toward this beautiful kind of bluish, it's kind of just a light teal. It's so pretty. I'll just call it, let's see what they do call it in here. They just call it fabric A. What do we think it is? It's kind of a beautiful light blue. I'm just going to call it that. It kind of reminds me of robin egg blue in a way. So we're going to press this way, and we do the same thing with the letter A fabric. Again, our beautiful kind of robin's egg blue and our gold gingham until we have 2 of those, and those are here. Now, our pattern does tell us do not trim. Now, if you're like me and you like to trim off those little dog ears, you can by all means do that. But right now they're saying don't trim this down yet. There's another step coming, but we can absolutely trim away those dog ears. That's no problem. So far we have, oh, there's a special instruction here. Look at this. Notice how on this one, we're pressing toward our robin's egg blue, but on our other one with the gingham, we're actually pressing toward our gold. We're not pressing toward the green. So we need to make sure, oh, and we did that. We paid attention to that. That would be one that I would be very likely to miss, assuming, right? Assuming things, everything's pressing that, but no. And I know why that's going to be. Why is that? Interlocking seams. You already know that now. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of why we do what we do here. So with that there ready to go, in order to make this very unique block here with this cute little chick, if you look at this fabric, this is a Lori Holt fabric from Riley Blake. This is little chicks. It's just adorable. I could not resist picking that fabric for this particular project. So here we are with our next portion, which happens to show the gold part over here. And this is going to be our kind of our light blue again. You can either draw the line diagonal to diagonal, or in our instance, our seam guide, our team used the seam guide. We went ahead and we backed that with our chick fabric. And our chick fabric is just ever so a little bit larger. We could have trimmed this down to exactly match this. It's so much easier to cut a standard size, right? This thing is cut to 4.5 inches. We could have cut 4 3/8. Why? It's a little bit bigger, and that's just fine. You should see a little bit of fabric all the way around. So I have my gold and our beautiful robin's egg blue, right? Either draw the line diagonal. Let me show you that, just so it looks just like the pattern, so you're not confused. And you can now understand what your options are of either drawing the line, maybe you're at home, it's midnight, you're sewing, you don't have one of these things, and that's fine. You don't need that. That's just an option for you. We have our chick fabric right side up. Notice we have the gold in the corner in this lower quadrant, and we're placing that so we see a little bit of our chick fabric all the way around, right? Now we pin here, so a 1/4 inch on either side of that. Or if you're like, oh no, I listened to Jen at the last video and I picked this thing up, and you do it this way, it doesn't matter. Go ahead and sew that. Now you'll see what's going to happen here, where those two, well, let me just stop talking and let me start cutting. You'll see what I'm was about to tell you. Let's look at what we have here. In this instance, with the chicks in the corner, the floret is down here, but in this instance, on this half, the floret's up there. That's the part I was talking about. Through the natural process of what we're doing, you will automatically get this switching happening. So at this point, let's look and see what this is letting us know. In this instance, with the floret up, this is called a floret, this is a Riley Blake, we're going to press toward our letter D. Okay. And then I can see in this instance, so this is where we are right here. In this instance, here, they're going to once again are asking us to press toward our letter D. Notice underneath this for block 1 and for block 2. So these are specific. You'll make 4 of these for block 1 that look like this. And you'll make 4 of those for block 2 that look like this orientation. So just make sure you're keeping track of that. And then again, for the gold gingham, we bring out our block. You're making 4 for block 1 where you have that gingham over on that left. And for block 2, that gingham, which will automatically happen, just like we saw. You didn't have to do anything tricky. It does it for you. You'll have the gingham up there. Just make sure that you always are putting this orientation in block 2 and this orientation of block 1. You'll get that right. Lay everything out and make it one more visual check before you start sewing things together. But there's another thing that we need to do, and that's in step 10. This is an oversized unit, which I love. It gives me the grace to not have to be perfect in my sewing, that we will now trim this unit up to 3.5. This is another mission-specific ruler. There's a lot of things I do that have 3.5-inch squares in them. So in this instance, I'm going to lay this ruler not only on this diagonal, but do you see how this point, this corner, is also splitting that line, that seam between the two of them? This is the only place this ruler can be. If I slit this down here, it might appear that it works because she said trim 3.5. But notice how I have a lopsidedness. So this is more than just this alignment of the diagonal. You are lining up that corner too. Diagonal, you're on the corner. Again, works amazingly well with a spinning mat. So I don't have to move anything. I don't have to pick up my block. I hold it in position and make my turns. If anything moves, I'd readjust. Sometimes I bump something, move my fabric away, make sure where should I be? On my diagonal, and that ruler should be right in that corner. Right there. Right there. Make my cut, make my cut. Okay? And that is how we get these units so perfectly cut. So again, making 4 of those on one style, 4 of another with this combination, and then with the other combination includes the gold gingham, you're doing the same amount. Now that we've done that, and remember we were very intentional about the pressing, and we talked about why are we pressing like this? And you already know the answer. Interlocking seams, we're always going for that. So let's look at what we have here. We know we have this here, and we know that we have this here. Those sure look alike to me because I want to confirm this picture, this sight picture. I'm going to place these right side together and look what I have. Seam going this way, seam going that way. Here, seam going this way, seam going that way. You know, I have to say the care that our team takes to write these patterns, and the only way we can really kind of know this is we make it. We make it again and again and again to know what is the right pressing. I have seen and I own many patterns, not written here, that just say press as desired. What does that mean? Right? It means I don't really have guidance into what is going to help my blocks have interlocking seams, my blocks lie flat. I'm really kind of guessing at that point. So I just want to send a shout out to our pattern writing team, our pattern testing team that goes back and forth for days, sometimes longer, to make sure these pressing instructions work. So I hope that you, just like me, appreciate it. It's definitely helped me dial in my own quilt blocks, knowing how important pressing really is and interlocking seams. So you can see we've got beautiful interlocking seams. We're certainly going to be sewing a 1/4 inch and pressing this open so that we can distribute that bulk, right? That's our block 2 that we've done. It's amazing how these steps help these things that actually have a lot of things coming together. I would not dream that pressing up on my own, right? I'd find it through maybe trial and error. So I appreciate their pressing instructions, and you can see how we've pressed that. So once you have these units put together, let's move on here and let's talk about our corners here. Very straightforward. If you've gotten through this part, you're going to have no problem here with the rest of this. We have our E and our F. Strip piecing, right side together, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Tammy has mentioned that when she presses a strip piece unit, she does not have it horizontal in front of her and ironing this way. She has experienced kind of a bowing, kind of a rainbow effect. So she has felt that when pressing this, that it is better to press this vertically. So I thought that was something that I wanted to pass along to you. And I can see that she pressed toward the dark. So what she's referring to is there is certainly this motion that happens naturally. And your fabric, because it's warm, tends to go, okay, I'll turn. But when we press vertically, our hand isn't doing this curve, right? And pressing it to the side, finger pressing. And I'm going right up that seam. There isn't this motion that we just naturally do as people. So I thought that was a nice pointer I wanted to pass along. You're going to go ahead and press your strip piece unit, and then we're going to subcut that 8 pieces, and you're cutting those in 2-inch sections. Okay, so we have that, and then simply attaching a piece, letter G to that here. Pressing to the outside, no big mystery on that one. So that's how we're making our corners. As far as our center of our sunflower unit, you guessed it, more draw the line, sew and flip. So much of a recurring theme here. In this instance, we're going to be pressing toward the brown. My natural instinct and your natural instinct is probably to press to the outside and leave it there. When they were making the block, they discovered that the block laid flatter when they went ahead and pressed this seam toward the brown. So we're going to follow suit with that. And I know we touched on that a little bit in our B block, but let's just revisit that if that's not a natural thing for you to do. And get that iron heating up again. I'll just do one of these, so I'm just reminding you. Once you're happy that you got those 4 squares right in the corner and you're ready to trim, go ahead and make that trim. Obviously all the way around. I'll just trim 1 for now. Trim 1, better than that. Take your block to your mat, wrong side up, and then I'm simply pressing the portion I just trimmed toward the center of that block. So that is now with the seam pressed toward that brown. Now, as far as final assembly goes, this is where, again, we bring in the elements. We already made these units. We talked about that in our pattern. We made these units. So lay everything out, and you can see here, once you have the section done, you're going to be adding these side units. And we pressed to the outside. And of course, you're going to do this here and here. For our center portion, we have our sunflower portion, these units, right side together. And we're pressing toward the middle. Why? So that we can have interlocking seams. So you can see here, as we really go into our final assembly, we have this row together, this row together, and this row together. Of course, when we get ready, this is what's important to me. This and this and this and this. Right side together, pin, pin, pin here. Sew your 1/4 inch seam allowance, press the seam open, repeat for the bottom until you have that block. And when you go to make your other sunflower block, we already know that these are going to be flipped. Why? We already saw that process. Just through the natural way the block makes, you will have that reflection there. And now you'll have your 2 sunflower blocks done. Now, I promised you a little bit of hand embroidery, so I'm going to clean up. We're going to come in with some close photography. You will have embroidery floss in your kit. What you'll want to be grabbing for is a hand sewing needle, Richard Hemming size 4. That's kind of my go-to needle. Anything that you enjoy using for hand embroidery will work. Your embroidery floss will be in your kit, and we'll be using 2 strands. So when we come back, let's talk about some hand embroidery, and then let's give you an option if you're like, I don't want to do any of that. I respect that too. So let me clean up and I'll be right back. Okay, let's talk about hand embroidery. I really very much enjoy hand embroidery. It is certainly something I was doing well before I was a quilter. Passing time on layovers and delayed flights. It certainly had plenty of that. So on page 3, again, we have the drawing of the antenna, and this is kind of the outline of the, of course, head of our bee. Now, if you don't have a light box, what I would recommend doing, because this is quite hard to see without a light box, although I can see it somewhat, is getting things lined up. If you're comfortable with that, you can begin to draw. The other thing I have done before I had a light box is I taped this up to a patio with nice bright light, and I could see and I could trace. But we have the luxury of this beautiful wafer light box, so I can very precisely get right where I want to be. And we can see that the antenna is coming out of those corners, right? So if you kind of line up for that, it's going to work really well. Now, I am going to do the hand embroidery, so I would use a friction pen. This is a temporary marking tool. We all know that. You've seen me use this so many times. Draw a line, you don't like it, iron it away. This is temporary. But if you're like, doesn't matter how many tutorials you show me, Jen, I don't want to do this. I want to draw them on. You would use a micron pen. This is a permanent marker. It is forever. No amount of ironing is taking this away. So if that's you, position yourself exactly where you are, and you could use this marking pen or something else that's permanent to simply draw those on. Always an option for you if you don't want to do this. But I would like to do a tutorial for you on hand embroidery. Encourage you to give it a try. So I'm going to position this, make sure I'm exactly where I want to be, and then I'm going to draw the line. And come back and do this one. If you sneeze or you don't like what you see, simply iron it away and start again. That's my favorite part. You don't have to live with the lines you see if you're drawing with a friction pen. Okay, but if you're happy with that and you're ready to get started, I have a Richard Hemming size 4. Again, nothing magic about that needle. It's just a package of needles. We've had this for years. Very affordable, just a couple dollars. If you don't have some, that's a great one to add. Nothing special though. If you have a needle at home, that will work. 2 strands of embroidery floss. I have a knot in the end. I'm going to come up, and the whole goal here is to really be heading right down that line that I've drawn. And I really need to start almost right in that corner of that antenna so it looks like it's uninterrupted. And I'm going to split the line right there. Notice there's short stitches. Go down a distance, split the line, and come back. Right where you had previously, then go down a distance, split the line, come back where you just were, go down, split the line, and come back. Now, these were fairly long and bold stitches for a back stitch. Up here, where I have more curvature, I need to kind of cool my jets a bit and shorten that stitch length. If you want a very regular, the same stitch the whole time, I would say that those stitches should be much shorter, probably around this distance. So sometimes when I'm doing a lot of back stitching, I will regulate that. If I'm going in a straight line, I don't want to take short little stitches. But if I'm doing a curve, I have to take shorter stitches. So that's kind of just going to depend. Now, I don't like what I'm seeing right here. So it's got a little bit of a jog. If you don't like what you're seeing, I go remove that. I rethread my needle and start again. Does that happen? Absolutely. In fact, I was doing some stitching this weekend and it just kind of got a little bit wonky. Stop. You don't have to accept that. Go back. Let me do a better job of going right back where I had been. Now I'm happier with that. Once you're done, simply turn this over and you'll be very shallow so the needle doesn't go to the front. You need to stay on the back to do your tie off. I go under one time, go under 2 times. We do not want that stitching to come undone. Don't want that to happen, of course, right? I also don't want a long tail. I have had that before where I had a white and my embroidery floss was black and I cut the tail, quilted my quilt, and I could see that tail in there. It drove me absolutely crazy. So if you are worried about that, one thing I have done is I have fished my embroidery floss back down, because you know that you could put the embroidery floss behind the black and no one's going to see that, right? You could do that, and I have absolutely done things like that. I don't think I've ever taught this before, that this is just something that I've kind of taught myself to do when I just knew there was a high chance of seeing that black embroidery floss, that little tail. Maybe it's only 1/4 of an inch, but it drove me crazy. And then I trim here. Now there's no chance of that tail being here. So that's kind of a bonus. I wasn't going to teach that today, but if this was a darker fabric and I wasn't worried about seeing the black embroidery floss on this beautiful robin's egg blue, I wouldn't have fished that back. The other thing that you could do is start your embroidery here, go toward here and tie off back here. And again, start here and go back and tie off there for that very reason. So that's just something else that I've learned about embroidery is where should I start, right? Where should I start this process and why? So that's how we go ahead and do a simple back stitch to be able to stitch our antenna. So after you have stitched your bumblebees, you have your sunflowers done, just like we've been doing the layout on everything in the Pieceful Patchwork series, this is when we get to add our sashing, our cornerstone here, our really pretty sunflower borders, and we're off to get everything quilted. Now, I have to tell you about the binding fabric here that we happen to wrap around one of our beautiful glitzy binding holders, which is fun. Like, binding's usually a chore. I think it still is, but it's somehow less of a chore when I wrap it around something glitzy and fun. This fabric is called Sienna, and it was actually made by Benartex over a decade ago, and we continue to have it printed just for us. There's something magic about the rich colors of this binding, and there's gold in here, that makes it still the perfect fabric that we use in so many of our kind of moving toward fall projects. So I wanted to point out, while you're not seeing a lot of it, it's still a beautiful fabric, and I think the perfect finishing touch. It's obviously the center of your sunflowers and the cornerstone of your quilt. And I just wanted to tell you why we keep bringing that in. It's really quite special. It's a perfect finishing touch, as they say. So as you can see, with some good tips and techniques, these blocks are absolutely achievable. Do some practice, maybe if you're a beginner, but don't let that hold you back from getting the kit. These videos are going to be free for you to watch in perpetuity, okay? So go ahead and get these kits because they're always limited in supply. And be sure to get the other months in this series as well, of course, videos for those too. I have already done the design work and coloring of the September project, and you don't want to miss out on the beautiful rich fall colors that are going to be coming your way as we continue our series for Pieceful Patchwork. I'll see you next month.